We are joined back on Google Plus again. Now is where we're headed. We're joined by two folks who are kind enough to make time for us from Washington, D.C. Caitlin Fleming with Social Finance Incorporated. I'll give you a little plug, a St. Louis native, where your mother says you should call more. And Tim Delaney from the National Council of Nonprofits, both from D.C. So let's dive right in. I think we've got a lot to talk about here. You know, unless you are just flying back from another planet, you know there's something called the fiscal cliff looming, sequestration, cuts, taxes changing, all kinds of things on the table. What are you guys looking at when you watch the news as it pertains to nonprofits? What are you worried about?
Well, here in Washington, D.C., we're looking at the fiscal cliff as two major threats to America's nonprofits. More importantly, the work that they do in local communities. The first threat is there is scheduled right now in law an 8% across the board cut of all domestic programs, or virtually all domestic programs.
If a deal isn't reached, as we've been hearing about, those cuts go on.
Well, yes, exactly. It's existing law, and so if Congress does not step in before January 2nd, they will then cut all these programs. As a consequence, we're looking at cuts to Head Start for children, Meals on Wheels for elders. We're looking at food safety issues, transportation safety issues, disaster funding, all sorts of problems that are going to get cut. Now that's the first problem because it shifts all sorts of additional burdens onto the backs of nonprofits. We already don't have enough resources to do the work that needs to be done. That then leads to the second problem and the great threat that we're facing. And that's that this Congress is looking at capping charitable contributions, capping the charitable giving incentive so that your donations to your churches, to your synagogues, to your local food bank, your Girl Scouts, your United Way, all that then will get capped. And so people will really be hurting because nonprofits are being asked to do so much more with so much less. And it can't be done. It can't be sustained at this level.
Caitlin, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Tim's right. I mean, the proposed cap on deductions, the recent national economic study indicated that even just a $50,000 cap could reduce charitable giving by $150 billion over 10 years.
Wow. And
this reduction in philanthropy and cuts to domestic spending, I mean, it's a real problem on the ground. That's, you know, fewer homeless people that can find stable housing and fewer children that can get educated. And as a lot of your guests have been talking about throughout the show, it's time to start thinking about investments in social programs. And it's not just the right kind of investment, it's a smart investment. And research shows that for every $1 invested in an early childhood education program, for example, we see $7 in avoided costs and benefits from those programs. But when budgets get tight, these are the types of programs that get cut, and nonprofits don't have the resources to pick up the slack.
So should the government take over these things in the first place? Where, you know, that's kind of the backdrop a lot of these conversations are taking place against, is with the role of government. Should nonprofits be doing more, or should the government be filling these gaps, and should we do it through the government?
Well, one of the things that we think about in our work, and we hear from governments and nonprofits and philanthropy from across the country, is this fiscal cliff, for example, is just a symptom of a larger systemic reality of fiscal challenge that we're facing. And it's time for all of us to get serious and kind of take the long view on how we can work together creatively and develop new financial structures like we work with those parties to do on social impact bonds, that give nonprofits the full resources that they need to achieve the outcomes that our communities need, that governments make the most impact out of the limited resources that they have, and that philanthropy and even new funding sources can make catalytic investments with their limited funding.
And Casey, I feel the need to add in there, Caitlin's absolutely right, by the way. I would simply add that the research shows that government has been turning to nonprofits to do more work in terms of delivering of services for the last 20 to 30 years. Most people have not been paying attention to this. And so government is turning to nonprofits saying, you're more efficient, you're more effective. And so then they're turning the work over onto us, asking nonprofits to then do all that work. At the same time, they're taking away the resources to do it. We're looking at state governments that are slashing their programs and then turning to nonprofits saying, you need to take these over. We're not going to give you any funding for it. We're just going to leave it alone and allow you, because you're mission driven, to step forward to fill the void.
And I know locally, we serve Illinois in our viewing area here too at Channel 9. I know in Illinois we've had instances where they've done the work and they're not getting paid from state agencies.
Absolutely. In fact, we did some work with the Urban Institute a couple of years ago, and this project is continuing. And your viewers in Illinois will probably want to know that the Donors Forum of Illinois is working on this problem. And the Urban Institute has documented, and I'm reading here, that the state of Illinois is the worst in the nation on late payments to nonprofits. It's the third worst for not paying nonprofits the full cost. Not only do they not pay us any profits, they don't pay us enough to actually do the minimal amount of work in the first place.
Okay, so as we run out of time here, just briefly, what would, if I gave each of you a magic wand, what would you like to see our lawmakers do that would help as it pertains to philanthropy in the U.S.?
Well, what I would urge is that all of your viewers contact their representatives and their senators in the U.S. Congress and let them know that these cuts cannot continue on domestic programs. Say no on the cuts, and most definitely say no on all the proposed caps on charitable contributions.
And in addition to addressing the immediate crisis of the fiscal cliff, I'd love to see governments start to shift their policymaking and financing of social programs more towards outcomes rather than outputs that gives nonprofits the full resources that they need to achieve the outcomes our societies need.